what's up?
Hello.
How's it going?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I've been getting some like DMs or emails or something saying that you have some bad takes.
Oh
What's
God, did I actually reach your side of the internet?
Yeah, I don't know what happened though. I'm not
Uh,
a lot on social media these days.
that's probably for the best. Yeah, you're here as penance. You're the flail that I'm hitting myself with.
Okay.
Essentially, I had the audacity as an American to talk about another country's politics, so I'm compensating for that. Uh,
Classic.
yeah, exactly. I know it's an American thing. Um, so I wanted your opinion on some stuff.
Okay. Well, the one thing I can say for certain is that no matter what I say, you're gonna have a lot of Germans in there saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. They just love that shit. That's what we do now instead
That's
of
fair.
going to war with our neighbors.
Oh, good. Well, that's the I guess that's the peaceful solution to your biological instinct as a Germanic barbarian to
Hmm.
attack those
Of
around you.
course. Sure.
So for those who don't know, I guess I don't know who wouldn't, but just still, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, what's up, Chad? I think that's what streamers say to the audience. Hey, what's up, Chad? My name is Dan Arrows. I'm a podcaster. I'm a YouTuber. I have a podcast called The Iron Dice. I have a YouTube channel that's called Three Arrows that has been resting somewhat recently. And I talk about history and politics mostly. And yeah, I currently live in Germany as well.
Um, yeah, we could infer from your accent. I actually wanted to ask about that because, I'm actually a pretty big fan of your channel. Before I
Oh,
saw
thanks,
it,
man.
well, yeah, before I saw it, I was like, fascism, that sounds cool. But then I watched some of your videos and I realized, whoa, how wrong I was. Um,
That's a good trajectory, though.
yeah, people have gone on worse arcs.
Yes.
But it has been dormant for a while. Could you tell us a little bit about like the podcast and what you're working on now?
Oh, sure. I think this was roughly a year ago. I kind of hit a wall, like content-wise. I really got this fear of just shitting out content that was just there to reaffirm the views my audience already has. And when I started out on YouTube, I was just like, okay, I'm making some videos for fun, but then it got really successful, so it quickly turns into, okay, not I think I want to do this video, but what video do I do next? You're kind of looking for topics there. And I felt really boxed in by the audience that I had acquired
Hmm.
to mostly go off of debunking right wing stuff. And I wanted to try something else. So I started this podcast called The Iron Dice, which is one half history in a narrative format. So it's not like your history lessons. It's basically me narrating a story. And the series that we have going right now is about the early years of the Weimar Republic and the events that would um, launch the full-on civil war inside the German left, the Social Democrats and the Communists, that would climax in the ascendance of the Nazi movement. And the other half is me
Hello,
talking about
everyone.
politics, just giving my spin on political events from a European perspective, be it German politics, geopolitics. The last one was obviously about the German election and the dawn of the new alliance in the Indo-Pacific. I had a guest on, Derek Davison, to talk about Israel-Palestine, all kinds of different stuff. Yeah, so one half politics, one half history.
Nice. I haven't had the pleasure of checking it out yet myself, but I've had a couple of people close to me, and a few content creators say they liked it very much. So I
Oh,
will,
awesome.
right, I will reflect their recommendations as the sun is reflected off the moon, and say that you guys should probably check that out.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's everywhere podcasts can be found, I think.
So, first of all, I just want to say that I have, over the past couple of weeks, I've been making an effort to correct some of my deeply American tendencies with regards to understanding other countries. I was watching this long form YouTube video essay from some achingly small anarchist channel about the history of the Soviet Union. And he said some pretty unbelievable stuff about what happened after the October Revolution, how workers' councils were betrayed, and how the proletariat suicide rates spiked after Lenin would crack down on protests and stuff. And I double checked after he said it to make sure that I wasn't being lied to by some little random ideologue, and as far as I could tell, it was all true. And it made me really reflect on how much we have to learn, not just from other time periods, but also from what's going on in other countries. Maybe it can help us fix some of our own problems. So, with regards to Germany and the current political situation, would you mind giving me your impression of the Oh yeah, it was Anarch. Thank you. Sorry guys, it was Anarch. Okay, someone in chat reminded me. Um would you mind telling me what was your impression of the most recent German election as a person who benefits and suffers from its consequences? Like, what's going on over there?
I think so. I should preempt this by saying that this election and everything around it has turned me into a total cynic in terms of the electorate. So I have very low expectations of them at the moment. So that might color my view a little bit. It seems like there is a strong wish for continuity, but some form of change at the same time, as contradictory as that might sound. Germany is coming now out of the 16-year period where we had Angela Merkel as our chancellor and absolute conservative hegemony in terms of our politics, despite the Social Democrats being the other half of the coalition government. And earlier this year, it looked like that not only would that hegemony continue, but it might even get strengthened. The conservatives were in the polls at 36%. And the next party were I think the Greens at 18% and the Social Democrats at 15%. And that trajectory has changed a lot in the last couple of months now to the election that happened at the end of last month, where the Social Democrats actually overtook the conservatives. And it looks like for I don't know when the last time was that the conservatives were actually out of government, but it looks like now they are going to be for the first time in a long time. And so the coalition we still have right now is conservative as the main party, and the Social Democrats are the junior partner. And it looks like our conservative chancellor Angela Merkel is going to get succeeded by a social democratic chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who's somewhat comparable to Joe Biden.
Social democratic?
Yeah, in terms of their history, both being sort of on the conservative wing of the party, but then not becoming leftist, but rediscovering increased spending in their later years. And them and the liberals, and they are in talks right now to form a government body. So in Germany, how it works is you don't have the haggle over each bill like in the US, where you're trying to get the votes that you need, but the parties that form the government formulate a contract together on what they want to do, and then they vote on those things. So what policy is expected to pass is already decided when the government forms. And what I say when I mean...
That seems a little bit... I don't want to say anticlimactic. I want to come up with a word that doesn't completely out Americans as thinking of politics as theater, but it does seem a little bit anticlimactic. Is there no, to what extent is there this great push and pull over the course of an electoral cycle, like a whole term? Is it just all the cards have already been laid out and everything after that is business as usual, or are there upsets following that?
It depends. Usually it's all laid out once the government forms. But if there are changes inside the parties, for instance, the Social Democrats have moved further to the left over the last 4 years, so much so there was actually talk about them leaving the government coalition, there being new elections. But it's pretty much laid out at the beginning, and this way that we have a coalition government that actually reflects the varying social reality of the country more than I would say so, more than the two-party system in the US, where everyone is kind of herded into these two parties.
Yeah, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you that things are incredibly chaotic and unstable here in the US with regards to what's going on and what we can expect our politicians to do. We
Oh
have
yeah,
no
absolutely,
we have no
absolutely.
fucking idea. When you vote somebody in, you have no goddamn idea if they're going to start a war the next year or if they're going to suddenly tell the CDC that you know, that AIDS actually wasn't real the whole time. You have no goddamn idea. They are we you know, it's always it's always a roll of the dice with our system. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, and like Germany on a geopolitical scale is actually very conscious of that, of the U.S. being in this almost like post-traumatic state and facing a lot of gridlock. And the only thing Congress really can agree to in a bipartisan way is like military stuff or opposition to China
And Israel, support for
and
Israel,
pro-Israel stuff. Of
and
course, that goes without saying.
and that's pretty much that's pretty much it. Um, so with regards to so the German government is more stable than ours. I think I knew that because I know how America is, at least relative to other
Yeah,
countries.
well, that's not a high bar, I'd say. Sorry,
Yeah,
man.
exactly. You know, it's like it's you know, it's not that impressive. But with what we have, so there's a particular series of comments that I made, which is what got me in hot water to begin with. Do you mind if I relay them to you?
Okay, I'm ready.
So there's a party, okay? It's called Die Linke. I think that's how it's pronounced. And I noticed when provided demographic data that a decent number of voters, to the tune of about 100,000, moved from Die Linke to the AfD, which to people in chat who don't know, that's the far-right populist party in Germany, in the course of this election. Now, both of those parties lost votes overall. In fact, the AfD lost votes to every other party except Die Linke. So what I saw was what I thought was an electoral demonstration of a phenomena that I'm noticing online, which is that there are a lot of really shiftless leftists who seem more committed to nationalism and populism than they do to left principles. And I posited that this might be kind of like a Nazgul thing, that there are people who traditionally voted for Die Linke because it was sort of attached to the, you know, the Marxist-Leninist order of East Germany historically because it was a descendant of a party that ruled East Germany, and that they were shifting over to the right populist party because, well, I don't think very much of Stalinist countries, you know. I think that they tend to be pretty far right and authoritarian in their own way. So that was my assertion. Now, people have since provided data indicating that no, Die Linke is not full of like 78-year-old red boomers who want like the glory of the USSR back. But I wanted to ask you, how much do you think the legacy of East German politics influences the modern electorate in Germany?
I'd say a ton, but not necessarily in the way that you might think. Do you mind me sending you a link real quick?
Oh, please.
Maybe you can like throw this up on stream. That might illuminate some things. It's a German webpage, but we just need like the interactive graphic.
Yes, one moment. I can get it. English. All right, here we go.
Okay, so what you see there is like the voting results of our last election by district. And as you can see, the East is the far-right stronghold in the country, which might surprise some people because it's not that long ago it was a socialist country. Although I should say, like, I wouldn't say that like that like East Germany was like a Stalinist country, considering that the USSR after Khrushchev wouldn't even necessarily classify as Stalinist, but it's been no doubt like an authoritarian dictatorship, no doubt about it. In terms of how that legacy influences the contemporary political landscape, that's actually a very hot button issue over here. And no matter what I say, there are probably going to be some people who are pretty pissed off about me saying it. And there are kind of two explanations that I give why the East is so incredibly far right. compared to the rest of the country.
Oh,
One
wait.
of them is
I have
that,
one quick question because I'm
yes.
curious. It seems that support for the AFD grew, at least geographically, but their voter share actually diminished. Is there a reason for that?
It's more the AFD losing on a national scale, but tightening their grip in the East.
Okay. Okay, gotcha.
That's
Thank you.
yeah, becoming more of an institution there. So there are two explanations that I give why the East is so far right. One of them is historical, namely that the East, when it was the GDR, was very much a closed off society. There were foreigners there, but they were mostly there in the scale of guest workers. You know, our comrades from overseas, Vietnamese, Russians, and so on. But it was always closed off. Apart from the fact that the East has always been the more conservative part of the country. You know, that's where the Junkers were mostly situated, the rich landowning class in Prussia and the German Empire,
Mhm.
while the West was more the workers' hub. Anyway, so one thing that was hugely important to Germany's development away from fascism was like a cultural reckoning with fascism and the Third Reich as a whole, and that never really happened in the East. You know, people are quick to point out that East Germany was more adamant in denazifying its society, although only to a certain degree. But because the state ideology was that fascism only grew out of capitalism, you know, fascism being capitalism in decay, fascist tendencies in East Germany couldn't exist. You know, that just didn't compute with the party ideology. So if there were signs of that, like people setting the homes of guest workers on fire, which happened quite a bit in East Germany, especially after Mozambique became independent in the 60s, because people from Mozambique are obviously more visually distinct than others. This was never like connected to like, oh, this is like a fascist resurgence. This was mostly covered up, or these are just rowdy teens or whatever. So there was never like a cultural reckoning with the legacy of the Third Reich.
So they they were very adamant in attacking the aesthetics and the explicit Nazi stuff, but anything which was ideologically in that ballpark but not explicitly Nazi, they wouldn't recognize, because to do so would be an acknowledgement that fascism could arise from non-capitalist conditions.
That, yes, and also that they framed themselves as the true anti-fascist successor compared to West Germany, which was seen as like the fascist successor of the Third Reich. The war when East Germany built it was literally called the anti-fascist wall of protection. So the West was always in East German propaganda was framed as like the fascist one, while the East wasn't. So obviously, stuff like that happening within their country didn't fit the narrative. So they had an interest in suppressing that sort of stuff.
That is really interesting. I mean, yeah, that seems like the kind of a legacy of the KPD social fascist phenomena, you know, where I notice this a lot when people defend the Soviet Union as well, where they'll describe things that are categorically fascist or categorically imperialist, but then I'll point that out and they'll be like, well, it can't be imperialism. It's not capitalist, you know? Like how they
Yes.
misinterpret like Lenin's the final form of capitalism is imperialism, leaving out that he and everyone else knew there were forms of imperialism that weren't just the final form of capitalism, as though imperialism hadn't existed for all of human history. And they're like, well, you know, rolling tanks in through through the East and like conquering this and these satellite states, that wasn't imperialism, because how could it have been? We're not capitalist. It's a very religious way of thinking in a way.
Oh yeah, it was definitely inside the SED regime that was in charge of East Germany was an ideological blind spot. The effects of which we can still feel today. But I also have to say that, so it's hard to say like how much of this like what plays the bigger role. But what is also really important is that, so the Third Reich also was a very closed off society, but West Germany didn't develop the far right tendencies, or continue them, I should say, as much as the East. And I'd say that comes down to Germany being exposed to modern immigration and guest workers coming into the country coincided with a huge economic upswing, what's still like called the economic miracle in West Germany. The time period that happened to the east was the 90s, when the Soviet Union collapsed and Germany got reunified, and they experienced modern immigration for the first time during that period. But that didn't coincide with a huge economic upswing for them, but basically the fire sale of what was the East German economy, which was mostly taken over by private investors, and partially even destroyed from like companies in the West who had an interest in taking out competitor companies. Mm-hmm. So these two events are like linked in the psyche over there.
That's completely true, isn't it? Yeah, because there wouldn't be any international corporations in East Germany. It would be completely closed off to the West. So they would essentially be like really small fish in a big pond the moment the wall came down. And the way
they just got destroyed. Yeah, they had no way of fighting this off. And this happening was backed by the party that got voted in the East, which was called Alliance for Germany. So yeah, that was like there was a complete takeover of the East German economy, and only a few companies remained in the hand of actually people in the East. You also saw a big shifting away of the people's wealth, the Volksvermögen, from east to west during that time.
Do you think that contributes now to the popularity of the AfD there? That globalism failed them because they only experienced it really after it was used to decimate their like half of the country?
I mean, the data bears that out. If you look in the East, the places where the AfD is really strong are all the places that are desolate, where people are moving away, young people are moving away because there are no opportunities there. Big companies are closing up shop. That's where the AfD really shines, and that plays into the sentiment, or like the feeling that a lot of people of East Germany have, and this might explain the voters switching from the Linke to the AfD and vice versa, is that they are looked down upon by people in the West. You know, that they have been taken advantage of, and that they have been dealt wrong that was never really rectified, even now, even to this day. And the left party, up until a couple of years ago, always had the status of, we are the party that sticks up for the East, for Eastern interest. And they have now lost that role, I'd argue, mostly to the AfD. And that might seem strange because they are so ideologically different. But, you know, it's not always policy positions or how they actually govern. You know, there are probably some people who say, who preferred, like, let's say Trump supporters who would support Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton, despite Bernie Sanders being much further to the left than Trump than Hillary Clinton was. But it's like the anti-establishment angle plays into it, and it's the same way in the East.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Wow, we don't really have... I don't know if we necessarily have an equivalent of that here in the US. I know that the East Germany, West Germany break is really, really unique to your country, but most of the regional breaks when it comes to poverty have a lot more to do with the death of industries as a product of the natural evolution of technology, or lines that have been in the country since the 1800s pertaining to slavery and land ownership. Not so much like this area just got sharked up by foreign and domestic competitors the nanosecond they were able to. I can understand how that would cause a really big break, and also how that would incentivize a lot of nationalist sentiment.
I guess there is some similarity there, because the AfD is not like an economically populist party. They are a bit more in favor of like welfare programs in their Eastern program, but on a national scale, they are still mostly market radicals. And in the US, it's similar, that these issues kind of get supplanted by like cultural signifiers. You know, in East Germany, it's like, oh, you know, the West is looking down on us. They treat us like shit. And in the East is in the US, I'd say it's more like you know, we have to like own the libs.
This is average age,
and yeah, stuff like that's like how East you get a state like Kentucky, which is dirt poor, voting in someone like Mitch McConnell, for instance, who just perpetuates those same problems. It's a similar issue in Germany, and that's probably or maybe the result of this trend in all of Western politics, where the way people vote is more and more detached from economic circumstances and gets supplanted by cultural signifiers. In the U.S., this is probably in the U.S. the biggest example is probably like the term working class often being instead of like talking about like a fast food worker, they talk about like a guy who drives a pickup truck and like wears a cowboy hat or something, but who's actually like pretty economically well situated.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, you're right about the cultural signifiers. That's a big strategy on the far right here in America, especially today, where they'll take note of real economic problems that that poor people experience, and then they'll deflect their causes onto some cultural issue. Immigration has always been the big one here in the U.S., at least for the past
Yeah, sure. Or it's
CRT
years. Right now, or it's abortion.
And they talk about, like Democrats, like they're these wealthy coastal elites, when, of course, in reality, if you look at like any demographic information when it comes to trying to address like the wealth gap, Democrats are heavily favored over Republicans, but it's the cultural signifiers. So you would say that the AFD, if they're not economically populist, is their populism limited exclusively to what, civic nationalism? Do they how hard do they signpost like the racial stuff? Do they talk about like preserving the demographic purity of Germany?
Yes, but there is a big fight inside the party, the same way there is a big fight inside the left party at the moment. And I'd say that fight inside the AFD is close to being over. It seems like the I don't know how to describe it. Like the AFD in the West, for instance, is still a far right party. They're still like, we don't want any immigrants here, immigrants out, fuck them. But the party in the East is more like, straight up blood and soil. Germany has to be like, there's like a conscious connection of them to like the Third Reich, while the AFD in the West is very adamant of distancing themselves from that.
I'm looking at a very interesting map right now of if I'm reading this correctly. Can I send this to you real quick just to make sure my translation is correct? I think that this is how many German website listings there are per region in Germany, and it seems like the whole of East Germany is in like an internet blackout except for Berlin. If I'm reading this correctly, is this like a per capita thing?
I'm not sure, but what this map is supposed to say, that is absolutely true, that the West is absolutely dominating the country economically. If you look at like the 50 like German richest people, I think one of them is from East Germany. Like the West is absolutely hegemonic in terms of economic opportunity, or like where the businesses are and stuff like that. Yeah, the East is like, especially the rural parts, are very much at the mercy of companies situated in the West.
Yeah, this is in 2000. I just think it's indicative of how like things may have developed, because the difference is so stark.
Yes.
So with the with the blood and soil stuff that's developing in the East, is there a significant pushback against the German anti-Nazi laws? Like, is that a topic on the table for discussion, or is that one of those untouchable things where if they try to work around it, but they can never challenge it directly?
It depends on what law you're talking about. Like, there are laws against like flying the swastika or whatever, but you can, for instance, it's hard to say. So they don't say like we're the successor party of the NSDAP. But if you would like talk to them in a closed room, that's very much like, I think what they feel like. Maybe not what they are, but like they're in the spirit of. So for instance, the AFD in the East is dominated by what's called the Wing, which is like the far right wing of the AFD party. And the guy who leads that faction inside the AFD wrote a book where he actually says that, if we want to fix this country, there has to be a large scale remigration project, getting the immigrants out, that requires a lot of like rational cruelty. Like talk like that. That's not explicitly saying we need to redo the Holocaust, but getting into that vein of we need to remove these foreign bodies from the country.
A lot of wink wink nudge nudge type stuff.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
I've heard that there are a lot of institutions in Germany that, especially the police and the military, that have a lot of, well, they have a lot of far right types in them, that there's like an actual problem, maybe even more so than in the United States, of an alliance between the far right and your your state legitimized enactors of violence. Is that something often discussed, or is that one of those problems that looks more apparent from the outside in, but internally it's more complicated?
I feel like there's a scandal every 4 months where there's like a far right circle discovered in the police force or the military. No, that's absolutely true. Like the AfD is, like, I mean, it has become like the far right party in the country. Like the AfD is pretty new. It's sprung up like around the 2010s, I think, for the first time during the Greek financial crisis. But yeah, they have come to suck up all the people who have far right politics who didn't vote in the beginning or voted conservative maybe, and those people often are in the military or the police. Yeah, especially for instance, like the head of our constitutional protection agency, which is there to monitor groups that seek to overthrow the government. Uh, the guy who headed that agency now is like, he's not an AfD member, but he's like, he might as well be. He's like so far to the right that he's barely even conservative anymore. And yeah, that happens all the time.
Do you think
that like these struggles get uncovered?
do you think that support for the AfD is going to dwindle now that the Syrian migrant crisis is no longer as directly impactful on the politics of Germany and Europe as a whole?
Yes, I'd say so, but I think that will mostly be eliminated to northwest and south. I think people will return to their previous parties over there, but I think the AfD is here to stay in the east. Absolutely. Like if you use your mouse and you go through some of these districts in the east, even the big cities, they're like it's in some district it's like hegemonic. They are still on a national scale shut out of power because no other party wants to govern with them. But yeah,
Well,
they are here to, they're the new protest party in the east, and that's there to stay.
okay. What would you say is the most... So you said at the beginning of this conversation you're feeling cynical about electoralism in Germany, and I think being a leftist is defined primarily by cynicism towards electoralism, but what is your what's your fast track forward? If there was some optimism, what would you say is going to happen in the near future, and what should people in Germany do to stop it, or I guess to let it happen if it's good? What are your feelings on moving forward?
Okay, in terms of German politics, I don't know how much influence is actually now possible now that the election has already happened. But like, there's probably going to be a shift to the center left, not to the full on left, but to the center left in German politics, considering that we now get the Greens and the SPD in the governing party. The risk there is that the SPD might not actually stick to their promises, like increasing the minimum wage, raising taxes on the wealthy, and stuff like that. They're kind of known for going back on those things. And the second big risk, especially for the Eurozone as a whole, is the liberals, who will be part of that coalition, the FDP, getting a lot in return for them taking part in the government. So they're sort of the kingmakers in the coalition talks. And if the head of the liberals becomes our finance minister, which is not unlikely, that actually might be a real systemic risk to the Eurozone as a whole coming out of the Corona crisis, because of course they're like total budget hawks. They want to drive down spending. And I think if that happens, Germany and Europe as a whole is in for a long and painful recovery from the Corona crisis financially. In terms of like positive stuff, the SPD, which now sets the chancellor, who is not a left winger by any means, but the party has been drifting to the left a lot. Olaf Scholz, which is their chancellor candidate, who will now probably be chancellor, he's not the party leader. The party leader are two other people, and he lost against them in the inner party election for party leadership because he was too moderate and too conservative, and the party has moved to the left. So the left wing of the party was very quiet during the election. They didn't rain on his parade or anything, saying he's too conservative or whatever. And I feel like they did that in exchange for some assurances that the SPD is not going to budge on the agenda they have agreed on. So if the SPD and the electorate, of course, can maintain the pressure on the leadership to follow through with their promises, I think we're in for some good stuff. Be it like maybe not getting rid of, but like softening the impact of the debt brake, which is a constitutional amendment that Germany has that limits investment, raising the minimum wage, taxing the wealthy, all stuff like that. Yeah, that was previously unthinkable under conservative leadership.
Nice. Yeah, it does seem like while there is a resurgence right now in far-right populism, it does seem like, at least in many countries in the West, the overall aggregate, like, median citizen is moving more to the left, and the positions being discussed, at least in some respects, are also moving over. I noticed something interesting, and it's that I'm just looking up cultural signifiers that correspond to AfD priorities, and 88% of Germans believe gay and bisexual people should enjoy the same rights as heterosexual people, which is better than here in America. And that's almost exactly the inverse population share of the percentage of people who voted AfD. It was like 10.4% voted for AfD, which is anti-gay marriage, and 88%.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe the cultural signifiers can work in our favor here, you know? It's unlikely that people are going to be willing to do any coalition governing with the AfD as long as they adhere to such dramatically unpopular social policies, right?
Yeah, I admire your optimism. I'm not sure how much. I'm not sure how much the average voter cares actually about that, because if you look like the approval rating of someone like Angela Merkel, who is super popular in the country, more so than she has ever been, and she personally voted against gay marriage a couple of years ago, and that didn't hurt her approval rating at all.
I wonder if it's like aesthetics to an extent, right? Because Angela Merkel, her opposition probably came off the same way Obama's did early in his term, you know? It's just kind of that stodgy establishment, oh, this is how we've been doing it for a long time. The AfD actually talks about, you know, like returning to traditional gender roles and degeneracy and stuff like that, right? So
oh yeah,
maybe they're the fact that they're more overt and more heinous in their opposition would change people's perceptions. But
yeah, they don't have a pathway to power on the national level. I can't see that in any way. They're too far removed from the German electorate for that. Yeah,
better than here in America, where they not only had the pathway to power, but did it, and probably will again in the near future.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
Well, I feel like we're all a little bit more educated on German politics right now. I feel like I've morally compensated for earlier mistakes made live on stream.
Oh, well, that's up for your viewership to decide. I can't say.
Do you like Die Linke, by the way? Like, circling it back?
Not really. I mean, if I would take a test on like my positions, that's the German party I would be the closest to, be it like in terms of their social policy or foreign policy. But they remain so divided and so ineffectual and bad at messaging that it's not really surprised that they are really drowning out here electorally. They only made it into parliament this time due to a special rule of getting 3 direct mandates. But the party, like, they seem incapable at the moment of providing, of at least like messaging what vision they want for the country. They are kind of paralyzed internally because they try to bring reformists and revolutionaries under one tent. So there are people inside the party who don't want to be part of the, a bourgeois democracy government at all, and there are people who are very adamant about.
Wow, they'll be very effective in politics. The people who don't want to be part of bourgeois democracy, I'm sure they'll go very far. in
I mean,
bourgeois
yeah,
democracy.
absolutely, and yeah, they just need to sort their shit out. I feel like,
Is
and
it
what you said
true they're
about the
anti-NATO, by the way? The Linke?
yes, the Linke is anti-NATO.
There's
I mean,
no
I'm not
way.
necessarily like anti-NATO also, but I'm not a fan of NATO too, so
No.
that makes
I
sense.
don't get me wrong. I'm anti-NATO. It's just there's no way the average German citizen or anyone like in that block of countries, like you can't really get massive popular support while being anti-NATO, right? But don't you guys
Uh,
like rely on like isn't the message like if we get rid of NATO, we'll have to boost up our military the way that America does? That like our umbrella keeps you guys social democracies in a way?
Um, I wouldn't go that far. I'd say that Germany and most of Europe is very much free riding on American military protection. But if Europe would coordinate their military efforts in a way, they would be able to protect themselves from whatever threat they think they're facing,
Oh, I totally think they'd be able
without
to.
like getting rid of the welfare state. But you're right. Like the average German is not anti-NATO, and I wouldn't say that the average voter cares that much about NATO, but who definitely cares about it are the other parties and like the media elite, which is totally in the tank for anything NATO. You know, there are a lot of like our journalistic of like our press, like the upper echelons, are part of these. You know, Atlantic Bridge, Aspen Institute, General Marshall Fund, all these like pro NATO think tanks, and that line of thinking of like NATO are the good guys, Russia is the bad guy. That's super dominant in German politics. So making a big deal out of your opposition to NATO, or making that like a condition to enter the government and raise the minimum wage or whatever, is very dumb, electorally speaking.
Yeah, it seems like again, like conceptually, I'm very opposed, or I'm very in favor of breaking down American military hegemony. I'm very much in favor of that. It just seems like from like a electoral perspective, you're essentially saying like, hey, what if we made ourselves less safe and had to pay more money? You know, like out of principle. I can
Yeah,
understand
I
how
mean,
that'd be
apart from that,
unpopular.
just from like an electoral perspective, like Germany is not going to dismantle NATO. Even if you're like opposed to NATO, like the smart way of going about it would be, maybe like not making a huge fuss of it, and then maybe entering the government and being able to push for the European army, where there actually is support for that would de facto um, would de facto like lessen our commitment to NATO because we would have our own protection.
We 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 keep our discretionary spending looking like this, so you guys can keep your discretionary spending looking like this. That's the those memes like guys like I keep my hands
Yes.
looking like yeah exactly. I don't
I
now
mean,
I don't
and that's
actually
actually
believe that,
and that's
mind
actually
you.
super bad for Europe as a whole too, because you know how like Poland and Hungary and all these Eastern European states are like totally cocked to the US
Yeah.
because they feel like they rely on the US protection. If those countries felt like they relied on Germany and France and Italy and Spain, I think the EU as a whole would actually be much more stable too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess everyone sort of because America has ties to everyone, you know. We got ties to Saudi
Yes.
Arabia. We're all over the place. Being connected under the US military umbrella probably doesn't mean very much for the people under that umbrella.
Yes, I'm well aware. Yes.
Oh no, I don't know. We don't. You have to understand. Americans, as a default, really don't think about our military in the context that everyone else does. You know, to everyone
Mhm.
else, the U.S. military is every once in a while you see a military base inexplicably in your country where there's been no fighting for 100 years, and you just know that someone somewhere is spending billions keeping that base up. But here, like we don't. No, nobody in our borders thinks about the American bases outside of our borders.
Oh yeah, I mean that's also part of the U.S. voter not caring about foreign policy that much anyway.
Hmm.
Like the U.S. just being like this military titan on the world stage, just the status quo that gets accepted for the most part, is what I feel like.
Yeah, we have the privilege of not caring about foreign policy because everyone else has to care about our foreign policy. We only act. We're not acted upon unless it's 9/11,
Yeah,
in
I
which
mean you
case
have
we
those
get
oceans like
yeah,
losing Vietnam or Afghanistan. Like who gives a fuck? You can just go home, act like it never happened.
just leave. Um all right, well, fairly depressing breakdown of the geopolitical situation at the moment aside.
Oh yeah, that's my brand. Absolutely.
Oh no, we know, I know. And chat, if you haven't seen, there hasn't been a new video in a while, but 3 Arrows video archive is spectacular stuff, as is the Iron Dice, both of which you should check out. I really appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, sure thing, anytime.
I hope I am actually a little ashamed that I hadn't found an excuse to have you on or to ask you on beforehand. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I guess it's pretty late over there right now, isn't it?
It's like close to 9 p.m., so
Okay, close to
not that late.
Well, I hope you have a wonderful night then, and hopefully I'll talk to you in the future.
All right, see you around. Bye, chat.
They say bye.